Yeah, Steve Rogers, Steve.
Regie, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my live streams. Now, this is a special live stream, and it is a special live stream for several reasons. Partly because we are going to spend some time talking about comic book restoration, a topic that you guys have asked me to address in previous videos and also in one-on-one conversations. But it's also a special live stream because I am joined by two guests from CGC. And I want to welcome Matt and Brittany to my live stream. How you guys doing?
Hey, we're doing really great.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
We're super excited to be here.
Thank you guys for joining me. I absolutely appreciate it. So as I mentioned in the pre-discussion that we were having, I did a live stream last week. And in this live stream, I kind of gave some introductory comments about who you guys were, what we were trying to accomplish here, your relationship with comics, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't do you guys justice. I really didn't. So I want to ask you guys to take a couple of moments to give us a little background on yourselves, your relationship to comics, your relationship or your job at CGC, and also just give us a feel for who you are in this hobby that we all love.
I'll go first because Matt's way more exciting than I am. My name is Brittany McManus. I'm the marketing manager here at CGC. I've been with CGC going on 6 years. When I started, I honestly didn't know anything about comic books, and my comic book knowledge now is off the charts. I'm very proud of it. Nerd alert. I do anything that has to do with the submission process, our online form, our website, anything like that usually falls under my hat of things that I do. And then I'll turn it over to this guy. He's the real deal.
Yeah, so I started collecting comics when I was about 12. And did that through high school and into college, and then was fortunate enough to hook up with a friend who was opening up a comic store in New Orleans, More Fun Comics. So I worked at the store for pretty much through most of college, learned restoration from Bill Surreal during that time, and then started restoring comic books for a living. I did that in the late 90s for a number of years, and then eventually moved to Dallas and expanded the services under the name Classics Incorporated. Started doing restoration in addition to, pressing in addition to restoration, and did that for a number of years there. And then 2013, I sold the company to a CGC and moved out to Florida. We merged the two companies, and the new name is now CCS. And then currently I've transitioned over to CGC, so I'm a primary grader over there now.
So how long have you been doing like pressing and cleaning, Matt? What if you had to put a time on it, how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, it started about 01, and it was all because of CGC. There really wasn't much of a need for pressing prior to CGC because there wasn't the grading standards weren't so succinct or so specific that the difference between a 9.2 and a 9.4 and a 9.6 really were irrelevant at the time. So when CGC opened, it kind of opened the door to pressing being a viable service. So yeah, so it's been about 17 years now, and it took a number of years to grow because nobody really had wrapped their head around it for the first few years, and then obviously since then it's exploded. Now it's huge.
Very good, very good. I think we're going to touch on a lot of the things that you've already spoken about just in your intro as we get through this conversation. But I want to give folks that are in the chat, and I think there's a handful of people here in the chat, I want to give them a feel for like how this conversation is going to go. So essentially what I've done is I've created a set of questions that I want to tee up for Matt and Brittany for this conversation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to alternate between asking them questions that I've prepared and referring to the chat and pulling questions that you guys have for them. And so we're going to basically do 3 rounds. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to go to the chat, and we're basically going to rotate through that for roughly 3 times. And the hope is that we can do this whole thing in about an hour. At least that's the goal. And the focus, as we've kind of alluded to, is really about restoration, right? I know when I did the previous video, there were lots of questions about other topics because CGC is an important player in the community. And so I know that folks have lots of questions about CGC, but the goal is to make this about restoration. So just recognize and understand that, all right? So One of the, and again, one of the things that we talked about is, Brittany and Matt, if you guys see questions in the chat that you guys want to get to, by all means, have at it. All right.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So how many people? We have about 38 people in the room, which is great. A lot of people have been sending me messages saying, hey, I'm at work and I can't watch, but I'm going to watch it on replay. So I have a feeling that this is going to be a well-watched video by the time it is all said and done. So the very first question that I have, and it really is just a foundational question, is what is the definition of restoration?
Restoration, the definition is taking a comic book and returning it to its original state using foreign material and trying to get the book back to as close to its original state as possible. That's the gist of it. And then, of course, from there, it goes into a lot of different permutations like amateur restoration, other things like that. But that's the basic definition.
Yep. And we're definitely going to get to that because I have some questions around that. So that is the definition. It was the adding of foreign material to a comic to return it to its previous state. That definition, is that CGC's definition for restoration, or is that like an industry-wide accepted definition for restoration?
Yeah, it's an industry-wide definition, and CGC basically adopted it. I mean, when they opened in 2000, they built their standards on the existing standards and then proceeded to tweak it as the years went on, those early years. So yeah, that is the basic definition that's been in the standard since the beginning.
Okay, very good. So let's dig a little bit deeper in that. And I actually picked up Amazing Spider-Man #1 earlier, well, at the middle part of last year, 2018. And I opened it up on camera, and I noticed that there was some tape on the inside cover of that book. And my heart kind of sank a little bit because in my head, I assumed that tape equaled restoration. And I've heard subsequently, or I should say, I heard during that live stream, people were like, that's not restoration. So can you outline for us, and I know you just gave the definition, but can you outline some examples of what restoration is and isn't? Because I think that that's helpful.
Sure. Yeah. As far as tape goes, technically it would fall under that category of restoration because it's foreign material that's repairing a book. But that was one of the exceptions that was made actually way before CGC. And the primary reason is because tape was so common on comic books going back to the 60s and even before that, it was just an accepted form of repair that wasn't considered restoration. It's almost treated like a defect. It's destructive towards the comic, if it has, because of the chemicals that are in the tape. So certain tapes can break paper down over time. So it's not really something very safe for the comic, but generally speaking, just the huge amount of books that have tape on them was the primary reason why most collectors just overlooked it as being something that was considered restoration.
Yep.
And oftentimes when there is tape on a book, whatever the tape is doing, the functionality of the tape, whether it's holding a detached piece or a spine, the graders will grade that defect as if the tape wasn't there.
Yeah. So if if a spine is completely split and then reattached with tape, even though the book's not 3 pieces anymore, we're going to ignore that repair and grade it as if it still is in 3 pieces.
Got it. That's actually very helpful. So tape is one of those things that is now acceptable, right? What about glue? Replace staples? Are those things considered restoration?
Yeah, and that's where we start getting into like the subtleties of restoration, because there's also the conservation category. But prior to that, which we launched a few years ago, all those things were considered restoration, which would be glue, replace staples, color touch pieces that are filled, tear seals, spine split seals, cleaning, cover cleaning, page whitening. There's a few other things like that, but those are the main things.
Got it. Did I just hear you say cover cleaning is considered restoration as well?
Yeah, currently it's some cover cleaning is allowed in conservation if it's done professionally. And that's one we mentioned earlier that, I mean, technically you're not adding to the book whenever you do that, but it's a form of cleaning. You're removing stains and sometimes you remove the original sizing and replace that with safe methylcellulose sizing. So that's more of a conservation technique because that's for preserving the longevity of the cover.
Got it. Got it. Now you just hit on something important. You talked about conservation versus restoration. What are the differences between that? I'm asking because I actually received a couple of messages from people like, "Hey, I need you to ask what the difference is." So can you illustrate what is the difference between conservation and restoration?
Sure. Yeah. The primary definition of conservation, which also has foreign material added, is it's for the preservation of the book, to keep it together, to bring it back together so it can be handled safely. But it doesn't take that extra step of aesthetic repair, which is, most piece fill, color touch, things that are going to make the book look, I guess, better. Things that are accepted in conservation are tear seals, spine split seals, piece reattachment, reinforcement. Like I said, professional cover cleaning, rusty staples that are taken out and replaced. These are all things that are going to preserve the book, not necessarily make it look better. Sometimes it does, but it's mainly to get the book back together. And things that we don't allow in conservation, in addition to that, is the presence of tape, trimming, and there was something else that slips my mind now. But yeah, so if those things are present, we will not actually give a book conserved grade. We'll give it a restored grade.
Is that the third one?
No, yeah, well, no, that was definitely not in there. But yeah, trimming and
There's another one.
yeah, there's another one, I think. But yeah, we have, and these are all outlined on our website. We have a very specific outline on the definition of restoration conservation and the parameters.
So if someone has a book with rusty staples, those staples could be professionally replaced, and that would fall under conservation and not restoration. Is that what I heard?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, because I did not know that. I did not know that at all. So that's super helpful. Very good.
Yeah,
Go ahead. No, please.
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah, the staples, they're tricky because rusty staples are very dangerous for a book long term, depending on the amount of rust and how it's stored. And so replacing them, can, even though it's improving the longevity of the book, it's now making the book conserved, which can affect its value if it was a blue label before. So, so it's a tough one. It kind of, it's deciding between what's doing what's best for the book versus what's best for the value of the book. Yep. So yeah, that's a tough one.
And with a restored book, you would of course get a purple label. With conservation, is that blue label with a notation? Like, how is that handled?
A conserved label is a blue label with a gray bar across the top. So the top part of it and the top logo part is like a gray color, and the rest of the label is blue.
Got it. I don't know that I've ever paid attention to that. I may have to look for that now, because as soon as I see blue, I'm like, oh, I'm good. I'm paying attention for a gray bar. So
yeah, look for the gray bar.
Yeah, okay. See, I'm learning something already. How about that? Yeah. All right. So there is. I went back because I was planning on doing a video about cleaning and pressing, and I went back to the CGC forums. And in 2013, this guy wrote one of the longest posts I've ever seen, and it took me 3 attempts to actually read through it, because I have like a 10-word max on emails and things like that. But it was a super long email, or super long post, and I read it. And he was basically making an argument that comic book cleaning, and certainly pressing, is restoration, because he used part of your definition of returning a book to its previous form as evidence that that is restoration. What is CGC's response to cleaning and pressing as restoration?
Okay, so to get a little more technical, restoration is the reversal of destruction, which is parts of the book that have been damaged, missing paper, tears, things like that. Pressing is more of an alteration. It's fixing the paper that has been distorted in some way from its original form, and pressing, all that does is return it to its original form through pressure, but without adding anything. And so that simple separation between adding to the book to return it to its original state, or just altering the book as it sits, is the difference between pressing and restoration. And then as far as cleaning goes, there's basically 3 kinds of cleaning. There's dry cleaning, solvent cleaning, and water cleaning, and then different permutations of those as well. But the dry cleaning is just a very it's a non-abrasive process where you're just erasing dirt and removing things from the cover that don't belong there, and just using like an eraser. So it doesn't really affect the state of the paper. Whereas like with a water clean, you're removing the original sizing. You could possibly, alter the inks. And so, that's definitely considered restoration. So dry cleaning and pressing is acceptable. Water cleaning or some solvent cleaning with pressing could actually push it into a conserved or restored grade.
Got it. I think I just lost your audio there. I'm not sure if people are able to hear you. I just lost it though.
Uh-oh.
There, you're back. You're back.
Oh, thank God.
I'm like, I don't know. I didn't touch anything.
Welcome to the live stream, people.
Scoot over with.
Yeah, because the blinds.
Oh, okay. The sun's changing. I see a lot of questions coming in.
Yeah, there are some good questions. There's one that I passed by that I would love for Matt to address.
Jump in there.
If that's okay. Someone asked the difference. I go to a lot of the shows and people ask all the time, like, what's the difference between a 9.8, a 9.9, and a 10? Mm-hmm. Assuming that, you look at a book and so many, especially modern books with good cover, like with good paper stock, they look phenomenal, just great. And you wonder, why is my book a 9.8 and not a 10? And it is kind of difficult sometimes to answer or explain or justify. So I wanted, that's a great question for him to answer as one of our primary graders.
Yeah. And believe it or not, I mean, it's not a simple answer.
Yeah. Which is why it's great for him to answer.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I mainly grade vintage comic books, like pre-1975. Those books are almost non-existent in 9.9 or 10, mainly because of the printing process back then, which was not that great. I mean, today it's better. Actually, it's worse in some cases. But yeah, back then, like printing defects like bindery tears, little staple tears, little tiny chips that have come off the corner. Every little one of these things is going to keep a book from getting a 9.9 or a 10. Basically, the main problems of the spine, in particular, spine stress lines, but also the top and bottom spine, they have to be perfect, razor sharp, 90-degree angle, cut corners. It's very rare to find that in books from the Bronze and the Silver Age and back. I don't know how many 9.9s and 10s we've given pre-1970 or 1965, but you probably count on two hands. Now, when you get into modern comics, obviously it's much, there's many more books that exhibit those qualities, the sharp corners, the white pages, perfect printing. But, the quality of printing is actually worsened in some cases over the past few years because print media is obviously, shrinking. And so publishers are looking for ways to cut corners, and part of that is using cheaper paper, cheaper printing processes. So we've been struggling actually lately with books from certain companies that are coming in with other defects that we've never even seen before. Like
they can barely get 9.8s.
Yeah, ripples through the paper and all kind of things. So so even today it's a little tough to get 9.9s and 10s, but essentially the difference is minutia. It's a 10.0 has got to be perfect. I mean, absolutely perfect in every way, not a single defect. A 9.9 can have, one little tiny blemish, maybe like a slightly rounded corner. And then obviously when you get into 9.8, then the door opens much wider and allows, still, minutia, but little things that are more accepted that are seen in the printing process.
We actually did a video on the differences between like a 9.8 and 9.6. And we did the video because people would get upset if they got like a 9.6. And I'm like, the line between 9.8 and 9.6 is so thin that I can't even measure what it would be between like a 10 and a 9.9 or a 9.8, And so, but I've seen brand new modern books have that ripple effect in the paper, super thin paper that just kind of crinkles. So I definitely get where you're coming from. So Brittany, thank you for bringing that question up. And Matt, thank you for answering that one. So there's a couple of questions here, but I want to ask one more question before I get to the questions here of the chat. And it's something that you've already talked a little bit about. And it's the categories of restoration. And I personally have talked about this in previous videos, but there are levels to amateur restoration and there's levels to professional restoration. Can you talk a little bit about those different levels and the distinction between them?
Sure. Yeah. So our current scale that we introduced about 3 years ago it breaks the amateur and professional into three categories, and it's identified as A, B, or C. A being professional, C being amateur, and B being somewhere in between. And then also the extent, which is 1 through 5, 1 being slight and 5 being extensive. We can get to that later. But yeah, the main difference between the two it's the materials that are used and then the application of those materials. So the materials being used have to be professional, which would be rice paper, which would be used for sealing tears and splits, acrylic paint for color touch, or watercolors. Leaf casting is something that's fairly new in the hobby, and so that uses different materials as well, but all archivally safe. And cleaning methods have to be done to where they're not using chemicals that are abrasive to the paper or harmful. So that's the materials that are being used. Amateur materials would be hard glue, any kind of glue that's like wood glue or model glue. Yeah, markers. Yeah, pen. Things that bleed through the paper, reglossing agents that are sprayed on the cover. Sometimes people will put like pieces of Xerox paper in for missing pieces, so anything that looks, pretty much, if it just looks bad, or the materials, poor, or actually unsafe for the book, that's going to be amateur.
Very good, very good. I actually saw someone sent me, because I get stuff from people all day. Someone sent me something from the CGC forums, and it was a guy that had taken an AF-15 .5 and turned it into a 5.0, and he had this thing professionally worked on. And I don't know how much money he spent, but it wasn't chump change. But the book was absolutely gorgeous at a 5.0, of course, fully restored, but just gorgeous. So I knew that was not somebody sitting there with a Sharpie coloring in spaces. So, so let's go to the chat here, because I see a couple of really cool comments that are coming up. Some of them I think are really quick answers. Some may take a little bit more time. But one of the first questions, and I think I could even answer this one, it's from Chad Lee, and Chad is asking if fixing spine roll is considered restoration.
No, that's fine, because we're just basically rolling the book back into place the way it used to be, and we're not adding anything to it. So yeah, we actually take spine rolls out often because they're very common on the older books. So yeah, that's fine. Yep. That would be under the pressing umbrella.
Very good. So one question here from Comic Crypto Stock, was a buddy of mine. He's asking the question whether extremely restored books, whether CGC will actually grade them. So maybe for the example that I just gave, which I think the answer is probably yes, if someone has a book that basically went from a 0.5, and you know what that looks like, to a 5.0, would CGC grade that book?
Yes, we will. Yeah, I mean, we'll grade, anything that we can, identify the restoration on, and it doesn't matter if it's a 0.5 to a 10.0. I mean, that's we'll grade that. Now, obviously, the work is going to be extensive. It's probably going to get a 5. But yeah, we'll absolutely grade, whatever's put in front of us.
Yep. Another buddy of mine, Candy Graham Man, is asking the question of what exactly is a married cover?
That's a good, easy one.
Oh, married cover. Yeah, that's just a cover from another copy. So, if you have a Spider-Man #1 missing the cover, you get another Spider-Man #1, you take that cover and put them together. And married only if it's attached. If it's not attached, they're just living together.
Well done. Well done, sir. Nerd humor at its finest. I enjoy that.
This is the conserved label.
Yeah.
And that will get a conserved label, you said?
Silver bar on the top.
You see it?
Oh, very helpful. Very helpful.
And you'll see that the top part is also gray, not blue.
Got it. I don't think I've ever seen those words on my label, so that gives me a lot of comfort.
We redid the conserved label, maybe 2 years? Yeah, about 2 years ago. We used to do a hybrid of purple and blue, and we decided that conserved would eventually get big enough where it should have its own label separate from the purple restoration label.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for that. So here's another question here, and then we'll get back to my questions. This will be the last one. What is the maximum grade you can receive if the cover is missing? And that is from my buddy Roger B is asking that question.
Yeah, that's a good one. So if the full cover is missing, you just have the guts, the interior's left over, it's going to get a no grade, which would be an NG. So essentially, we're not grading the book, we're just authenticating it at that point. Now, we'll still assess it for restoration, missing coupons on the inside, missing centerfold. But yeah, NG is the grade that'll get. Now, if it's missing the back cover or the front cover, but the other's present, then that'll get a 0.5 a pour.
That's very helpful. All right, good stuff. So let's take one last question from my buddy, Knights of Old. These are a lot of my actual friends. Like I talk to these guys all the time. So I want to take Knights of Old's question here before I get lost in the chat. And his question is, do you, Matt, think conservation in comics will be as accepted as they are in vintage, fine art, and print collections?
Fine art, probably not. Well, I guess what I think, how I understand the question is like a painting, right? And the huge difference between that is that there's only one painting, there's only one in existence. And so because of that, you only, that's the only one you can have. So whatever's done to it really doesn't matter. It is what it is. And that's also applied to comic books to some degree in terms of rarity. So, in Action 1, if there's only 100 in existence, I mean, at this point, over half of them are restored already. You've got a very, if you want an Action 1, you're probably going to have to settle for a restored copy. So the tolerance level of restoration on those kind of books is much higher than, say, a Hulk 181, where there's thousands out there, and people have a choice. So I think that really the rarity, down to the point of it being unique, is the factor in whether it's accepted or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? Because there's 10,000 Hulk 181s. I've got 2 of them here in this room alone. And so
he's graded 10,000 Hulk 181s alone, so there's way more copies than that out there.
Yeah, well said. Well, you graded 2 here. One is the signature series, and one is just a regular old series back there. Thank you, Brittany. All right. So here we go. This is round 2. So, and this is where I want to offer folks out there some tips, right? Because we've kind of defined what restoration is and what it isn't. We've contrasted it to conservation. We know kind of sort of where the lines are and what the levels of restoration are: professional, amateur, et cetera, right? So one of the main questions I have, and this is a very, very personal question for me because I made a mistake in a book that I picked up. So what are some of the telltale signs that a collector can look for if they're buying a book to know whether that book has been restored or not? And one of the first things I learned is just to open up the cover and look for bleed through, right? But I think that's only for amateur, right? I don't know if that would work for professional. So what are some of the telltale signs that we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very broad question. I'll try and be succinct with the answer. First, probably start with the kind of books that are most commonly restored, which are going to be the keys, obviously the books with the most value, that have held the value for the longest. So books that have been hot or expensive for decades are going to be your prime candidates. That's going to be your golden age keys, your silver age keys. Then you have your dark covers, your black covers, covers that basically show damage much easier. Those are very inviting for people to go after them with a marker. And then you have also your high grade books, the high grade books that in the 90s, as those books started to escalate in value before CGC, there was an impetus to work on those. So, but in a slight nature. So those are the trickiest ones, because the golden age, or the expensive books that usually have full restoration, like in Action 1, the work's a lot more obvious, because when you've added a bunch of pieces and done a bunch of color touch, it's pretty obvious. I mean, to most collectors have been around the block are going to see that. But when you're handling a very high grade copy of a Fantastic Four number 15, that may have only 2 hits of color touch on it, or maybe a small tear seal or a staple that's reattached, that's going to be much tougher to catch. So, as far the 2 main things that are on those books are going to be color touch and glue. And all the other techniques usually fall into professional techniques that are going to be done by a professional. And you're not going to find those that often, because, paying a professional to restore a book, usually it's relegated to like the more expensive books. So color touch and glue are the big issues. Trimming also, of course, which I saw someone asked earlier about catching trimming. I'll tell you, trimming is the toughest thing to catch out of everything, because it's actually you're not adding to the book, you're actually taking away its desecration to enhance the appearance of the book, which is a completely opposite thing from all the other repairs. So you're looking for something that isn't there. And to spot that, you really have to know that particular book and how the edges look and how that book was printed. So, and that's a whole nother, we could spend a whole nother hour talking about trimming alone. But color touch, like you said, bleed through is going to be, it's going to work for, you know, the ones that, or looking inside the cover is going to work for bleed through. But the best places to look are going to be the dark areas of the cover, which would be your spine line, the black areas of the cover, and then also tilting the book up like this and holding it in a raking light.
Right.
And you can see where there's stress lines, creases that don't break color for some reason. So when you see that in the light, you look a little closer and then you can actually tell. Sometimes you'll see, oh, there's you know, somebody's applied color there. Now, again, that's tricky because Golden Age books can have creases that don't break color, and a whole nother discussion. And then glue. The lastly, glue is basically you feel glue. You can't see glue, you have to feel it. So my recommendation is when you're holding a book, especially a vintage book, the first thing you should do is just run your thumb up and down the spine to feel glue, particularly at the staples or at the top and bottom corner where they seal splits that have opened up. And obviously open the cover to see if they've stuck together. So, you know, that covers most of it. You know, like I said, you know, you get into like the expensive books, it's a little bit more obvious.
That's super helpful. One of the things that I try to do for trimming, because that is hard to spot, is I try to look at like, and this is, I don't know if this is a sound method, but I try to, if I have a book, pull up another book with high-res photos online and try to kind of see where certain things are. Like, I think it was Amazing Spider-Man 101 that I saw, where Spidey's hands were pretty close to the edge, and you could see that the book had been trimmed a little bit. And I think they just trimmed the cover, so you also saw more of the pages of the book separate from the cover. So that's kind of how I spotted that one.
All right, so two things on that real quick. One, the cut of the book, and again, this is another complicated thing, but there's the right edge of the book is supposed to stick out at the top. The pages come to a point, but they vanish as it goes down to the edge. This is actually somewhat true on the top and bottom as well, but that's the most obvious side. So that's not necessarily an indication that's been trimmed, or that if the pages are showing.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be a spine roll too. And the other thing is the image. The image actually, what you described is helpful, but I would take it one step further and look at all four edges, or at least the two, either the side to side or top to bottom, because the way the covers are printed very haphazardly, you know, the art will be, you know, the image is shifted up or down or left or right. And so, you know, if one edge is missing art, you know, in the, if say your book in your hand is missing art on the right edge, but the image online has that art, you also have to look at the opposite edge to make sure that that image is just not shifted over, you know. So, but you can tell for books that are trimmed, not micro trimming, but ones that are trimmed like a 1/4 inch, you can, you know, there is enough of a consistency, especially in the later books, where if you're missing art at the top and the bottom or on both sides, then that might be, you know, a greater possibility of trimming at that point. But you know, yeah, and then there's many steps to go after that to look for trimming.
Very good. So you gave us a couple of things to think about with regard to like how we as amateurs can kind of spot color touch, glue, trimming, et cetera, et cetera. How different, and I don't know if this is a you or a Brittany question, but how different is that process for CGC? And I'm not looking for you guys to give it like trade secrets, but is your process dramatically different from what we would do, or do you do some of the same things and do some additional steps to ensure that the book hasn't been restored?
Yeah, not really. I mean, the techniques we use are the same one. I mean, it's the ones that I learned as a dealer, as a collector. I think the way people apply the steps or the order that they do the steps are different. But you know, everyone feels for glue. Everyone looks for color touch the same way. So there really, yeah, there's no really difference.
There's more eyes maybe that go on a book here than just you shopping by yourself. There's more than one person that's going to look at it. So if one grader sees something that causes suspicion, he'll be able to give it to another grader for them to look at. And then, you know, these guys have years and years and years of experience of just looking at the same books over and over. And so they just know them so well.
Right. Like 10,000 plus Hulk 181s, right?
They're used to spotting things.
Yeah, we've got our vintage team and the modern team, obviously too. The modern guys come in contact with the restoration much less often, but we've got, you know, a number of restoration experts on our staff, and so the higher dollar books go through actually as many as 5 or 6 hands, sometimes even 7 or 8. including all those guys. And so it's extremely, I can't even imagine if anything got through us after going through 5 or 6 of us, I doubt anybody else is going to find it. So, but yeah, we cover everything. And there are times where, something may be missed up to the 3rd person, and then the 3rd person catches it, or the 2nd or the 4th, but these are really minuscule things that we usually,
I'll say one time, when I first started working here, I brought a book into Matt and I asked him if there was I don't even think I was all the way up to him. And I was asking him, can you look at this for restoration? He goes, oh yeah, no, there's color touch on the foot. And I wasn't even, I hadn't handed him the book yet. I wasn't even all the way up to him. And I give him the book and I'm like, how do you know that? And he tilts it in the light and you can see that somebody had touched it with like a Sharpie and it was different colors. But I could have stared at that for hours and never seen it. Yeah. And I think that the graders and the restoration, the people who check the restoration, their eyes are trained. And so when I watch them grade books, they'll be like this, and this. And I'm like, what? This means like 10 defects and that book looks gorgeous. But they see things that I think that unless you're trained to look for them, or you're really you're a buyer and you're searching, someone wouldn't notice right away.
You've got to, I mean, the bottom line is you've just got to look at as many books as you can, whoever you are. I mean, whether you work in a grading room or you're a dealer or you're just going to shows, the best way to learn all this stuff is to just pick up, in terms of restoration, just, go to a show and just look at all the restored books you can at all the booths. And even have the dealer, point out to you what's on the book.
And I want to say too, when you're talking about buying books from dealers and making sure that you don't get a book with restoration, know who you're buying books from. You can go to shows and you find dealers. Some dealers will spend an hour talking to you about what they have and this and that. You should know who's trustworthy and who's not, and make sure if you're going to drop some good money on a book that you're really looking for, and you've been told it doesn't have restoration. And dealers at shows will look at other books from other dealers too. So you can take, I think that just knowing who you're buying from and making sure that it's from a trustworthy source is a good way to also not get
and the dealers, and the dealers are it's actually a very close community among dealers. So we definitely help each other out in that regard.
And I think that's one of the great things about the community as a whole, right? There is definitely a community of dealers and people that move books. And there's also a comic book community, right? And we spend a lot of time talking to one another, giving one another tips and pointers and techniques, which is, again, part of the reason why I wanted to do this video. So all of that was very helpful. And Brittany, while you're talking, I want to ask you a quick question from Who Dat Comics and Movies. He's asking a question here about cross grading, which I think you guys still have through February, right? You're still doing the cross grading services?
Yeah, crossover service is if you want to send a book from another grading company. Right now, we rolled out the incentives in October that if you submit a book for crossover and the grade doesn't stay, it drops, no matter how much that book is worth, no matter what tier it is, whether it's $100,000 or $5, you only pay a $10 fee to have it slabbed in a CGC holder, no matter how much it is. That introductory offer of the $10 and the free screening to let you know whether or not your grade is getting dropped ends on January 31st, but crossover will continue to run. So you will still be able to send your books in for 50% off the grading fees. Moderns are 12, economy or value, I want to say, is 16.
It's on the website, right?
Yeah, all the prices are on the website, but it's 50% off the grading fees, and that program will not end. That's going to continue. It's just the introductory offers we're not going to continue to do.
Very good. I've actually done a couple of videos on that as well. So if people need that information, certainly hit up CGC's website, but then you can also go to the channel because there's a couple of videos on that. So
I urge everyone to take advantage of the $10 reject fee while it's still in play, because that is thebomb.com if you've got some expensive books.
Write it down, bomb.com. Just say. All right. So let me ask you one additional question in this particular round. So let's say that I send in a book. And again, I talk about My Amazing Spider-Man #1 whenever I get a chance to talk about it, because I absolutely love that book. Let's say that I send this book into you guys, right? And you are walking Brittany down the hall carefully with my wonderful book. and you're approaching Matt and he sees color touch, right? Or some other type of restoration. Do you guys just grade it, encapsulate it, and send it the dreaded purple label back to me? Or is there an email or phone call that you guys make to say, hey, we see some stuff here. How do you want to handle it? How do you guys manage that?
Yeah, currently we just slab it, identify it, grade it, send it out the door.
But we have screening services. So if your book is a high value book and you think there's any chance that it could have restoration and you do not want it graded if it has restoration, you can submit it to CCS for screening with the simple question of, does my book have restoration?
Or not even, it's assumed. Yeah, we check that the screening is.
The screening is to check, is it a good press candidate? Does it have restoration?
Anything.
What's going on with the book?
Yeah, basically, is there anything that can be done to the book to improve it before it goes to grading?
It's $10, and if you want to,
actually, it's
$10.
$10.
$10 flat fee, a percentage of the book, $10 minimum.
And that's on the website. So.
But you can submit it for screening, and you can find out everything there is to know about the book, and then determine: do I want to press it? Do I want to grade it? Maybe it's not worth it at that point in time. But if you just submit it for grading, we're going to grade it.
Yeah. All right. Very good. That's super helpful. Because I don't have concerns about it, but I am going to do all the pressing and cleaning and stuff like that to ensure, that whole 9.8 for that Amazing Spider-Man #1.
Rogers in the chat asked if we.
Oh, not yet. I'm getting there. That's actually.
Yeah, I see the fees are coming up. Oh, by the way, a cover that's completely split and detached from the interior is a 1/8 max.
Very good. All right. So round three, and then we'll get back into the chat for some other questions here. Is what services does CGC offer to remove restoration, right? And I'm guessing, like, if someone sends it in, it's like, this book is restored, you guys can unring that bail. Can you talk a little bit about those services?
Yeah, and that's CCS actually. The book would go. CCS is the one that offers. There's 4 services. There's pressing, conservation, restoration, and restoration removal. So the restoration removal is, it depends on what's on the book, because a lot of books can't be unrestored.
When you submit a book for restoration removal, it automatically, regardless, must be screened, because it gets looked at by some of our CCS screening experts, and they'll actually let you know right then and there whether or not the restoration has a chance of being removed, and then it can move forward in the resto removal process. But sometimes it can't, and at that point in time, we'll give you the option to either get it graded anyway, or if you want us to send it back to you raw.
Yeah. So the types of restoration that can be removed. I'll tell you what can't be removed. Cover cleanings cannot be reversed. Once staples have been replaced, those obviously can't be, unless you can go find the original ones somewhere. Those aren't going back in. Trimming cannot be reversed. And then when you get into piece fill, color touch, tear seals, spine reinforcement, spine split seals, pieces reattached. Glossing really can't take off either. Rarely, sometimes you can, but most of the time you can't. But the other stuff you can. It really depends on the degree. Professional restoration comes off much easier than amateur. When you have amateur glue and color touch that bleeds through, you have to dig that out. It takes paper with it. So you're causing damage to the book at that point. And then professional restoration, like rice paper, usually lifts off if it's applied professionally. Obviously, if pieces are reattached, the piece is going to disappear. So there's a lot of different outcomes, but typically the grade is going to drop because you're exposing defects that were hidden to begin with.
Yep.
This is more of an issue for high grade books, because you really don't have a lot of wiggle room on a 9.4 if you're taking something off. Whereas if you have a 3.0 or a 2.0 with a 1-inch tear seal or a little bit of color touch, there's a very good chance that book's not going to go down and may even go up with a pressing. So that's another factor as well. But so basically all of those things are taken into consideration during the screening to determine, can the work be taken off safely? If it is taken off, roughly what's the grade going to be, value decrease, the concerns of the customer. Some people are very adverse to removal and only want very light removal done. Others don't care, so, we take a very conservative approach in the removal. We don't want to, hack a book to pieces or desecrate it. After doing this for 15 years, I've gotten a pretty good feel about, what people expect. So, I try to tailor that, to the outcome of the evaluation.
That's super helpful because I remember like when I, at various points I've been shopping for books and I returned back to comics at the beginning of 2017. And I remember being on eBay and I saw a book that I can't remember if it was raw or encapsulated, but it had these very neat boxes cut out of the cover. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why someone had done that. And then what I realized was that the book, I think, had color touch and the person removed those sections that have been color touched to, I guess, restore it to a more natural, form.
Right.
It just looked awful because they were just like these random boxes just cut out of the cover,
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Usually that sound, try and make it look a little natural, whenever you're removing color touch. Yeah.
I think this person had an X-Acto knife and a heavy hand.
It sounds like the same guy, kind of person that put it on in the first place, I guess.
Probably. So let's talk about this. And I'm not looking for exact numbers unless you guys are able to do that. But let's say that someone sends in a book. You realize through CCS that this book has been restored in some way, shape, or form, and the restoration can be done. And they're like, do it, get it back to its normal shape. I don't care if the Dre drops a full or more or whatever. Can we talk a little bit about like what are those costs for doing something like that? Is it extremely expensive to do that, or is it it's not too bad? What are your thoughts?
For restoration or for restoration removal?
For restoration removal.
For restoration removal, all of the fees for restoration removal are the same as pressing fees plus the screening. So if it's a modern book, the resto removal is $12 plus the screening fee. If it's value to your book, it's $25 plus the screening fee.
Got it.
If it's an economy, $40 plus the screening fee, and so on and so forth. It's the exact same prices as pressing plus that extra screening fee.
So and there are books that obviously take a lot less time to unrestore than other books. So it's not really based on a time factor that's spent on the book. So we it's just a flat fee.
Value based.
That's helpful. My buddy Ben, Tech 31 Kid here, is basically saying he has a Cap 1 that was a 4.0. But you, Matt, he says you personally scraped it off, and the book actually came back at a 3.0 blue label, which I think I would agree. I think is great. So, do you remember that book?
I do. I do. Yes, I do actually remember that. Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, that's a memorable book. I remember that.
Well done, sir. Well done. All right. So we've talked about restoration removal. Let's talk about restoration. So I have a book and it's not in the best shape. I want to send it into CCS and have you guys work some magic on it, right? And give me back, a 7 or an 8 or something like that. Does CCS do restoration? Yes,
we do. Yeah, and that was the original service, I guess, that I offered back in the day. So it never went away. And we actually have a guy named Kenny Sanderson. So Kenny has taken over the restoration responsibilities. Actually, he's been doing it for about 10 years now. And when Kenny started with me, right at that juncture, my interest in leaf casting was growing, and I knew about it. And the old methods of piece fill were, to literally either apply it with rice paper or attach, pieces from another comic book onto it, or something of that variation. And so we started exploring leaf casting, and so Kenny, as soon as he came in, he ran with that ball and started experimenting with that process, and it's actually turned out to be fantastic. So it's kind of the standard now in restoration is leaf casting. So yeah,
there aren't really fixed prices on restoration, so it's hard to give a number. If somebody wants restoration, they send the book in, we screen it, and then we have to kind of, it gets quoted out based off the work that really needs to be done to it.
Yeah, and most of the time it's going to be, it depends really. It could be something as simple as a spine split seal, which would be technically conservation, all the way up to a full restoration job. Most of the stuff we're doing these days are re-restoration, just because unrestored books are selling for such a premium that it doesn't help anyone to restore an unrestored book. So, usually books with married parts that are not blue anyway, or books that have already been restored, but maybe could be improved, the work could be improved. That's the kind of jobs that we're doing today. But yeah, so we do that. Yeah, Kane does that, and he does a fantastic job.
Got it. So you mentioned a couple of things over the course of like this conversation about restoration. You mentioned like rice paper, and now a couple of times leaf casting. What is leaf casting?
Okay, so leaf casting, to be brief, it's you use a pulp mixture, and the mixture obviously could be, everybody's got their secret concoction, I guess, but it's pulp, and it's in a liquid form, and so you submerge the comic book under water, and through a suction process, you pour the slurry into the water bath where the cover is submerged, and you suck the water down, and as the water is sucked down through the cover, right? It's crazy.
My mind just blew right there. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And then all the pulp settles into the missing parts of the cover. And then once all the water drains out, it's left. Then you take the cover out and you dry it flat. And it's the pulp is actually adhered to the edge of the paper. And so you flatten it all out. You shave off the extra bits that are around the edges, and then you proceed on to the next step of color touch.
It's a super crazy process.
And when he said pulp and then submerging in water, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, submerging water anyway to clean it. So actually, water is paper's friend if you use it correctly. So yeah, it's actually so submerging in water is not as crazy if you're familiar with restoration.
Let me write this down. Water is paper's friend if used correctly. I had to write that down.
I want to just say too, it can be its worst enemy. So I don't feel like we should be putting that out there in the world.
That's we make sure those words are in there.
that is super helpful. All right, so thank you for telling me what leaf casting was and briefly talking about secret salsa or secret pulp or whatever. That's helpful. So I want to touch on a couple of like controversial things, and not in a bad way. This is all within the realm of what you guys can handle. But there are people that
we're laughing at your responses. Everyone's gonna be soaking their comics now. That's great.
Yeah. Is that Chris? Chris is a nut. Be careful with him. I love that guy. But there is, just like with color touch, there's amateurs and professionals, right? And whenever I get a book cleaned and pressed, I send it to CCS, right? Because it's simple, it's safer. I like the professional to do it. But there are a lot of amateur people that are doing cleaning and pressing. What are your thoughts on that, right? Because once upon a time you were an amateur, right? Before you became a professional. What are your thoughts on amateur cleaning and pressing?
Okay, so we downgrade for that. Amateur pressing, amateur cleaning. Well, I mean, I guess we're talking about dry cleaning. That's pretty easy. If you can over dry clean a book, which means you would streak the colors, lift gloss, fray the paper. That's pretty basic. And then pressing, there was a series of articles we released, 3 or 4 years ago that outlined the different kinds of improper pressing, and which we will downgrade for if they're severe enough. And that's basically deforming the paper, there's terms like pebbling, warping, rippling, ink loss, or ink lifting, staple impressions left in the paper, flaring, basically if just like restoration, if pressing is not done correctly and the book is not returned to its former state, but into some other state, and the book, and it affects its appearance, then that's going to be considered improper pressing. And, it will downgrade for it accordingly, depending on obviously the grade of book and the severity of the defect.
Yep. Okay, that's super helpful because I've had people recommend to me that I look into that, and I'm just not interested in that at all. I think that it's wonderful if people want to do it, but that's not necessarily my thing. So one other topic that I want to talk about is there has been a lot of discussion that at least I've had about the fear of multiple pressings of a book, and how multiple pressings over time might actually cause a book to break down, right? And I think some people have said, what happens to the 9.8 that's been pressed multiple times, has white pages when it's encapsulated, but 10 years, 20 years from now, that book doesn't really look like a 9.8 because those pages in that book didn't hold up because of those multiple pressings. What are your thoughts about the longevity of books that have been pressed?
Yeah, well, there's really two things that you're talking about there. It's the multiple pressings and then improper pressing. So the book reverting in the holder, if it's a 9/8 today and what's it going to look like tomorrow, that's more about improper pressing, which would be, using techniques that are not really changing or setting the changes in the paper. And then they can revert over time. That does happen. They maybe have like a large spine roll in a book. And the paper's been stressed in that position for 40, 50 years. Somebody tries to attempt to take that roll out, and maybe they get it in place for a little while, but over time it may roll back. And that's not necessarily improper pressing. That's just not, I guess, for lack of a better word, not pressing it all the way or doing it a full press to a point where you've actually gotten the paper to relax and return back to its original state. As far as multiple pressings go, there's no issue with that. In fact, we, there are books that are improperly pressed that can be repressed and fixed back to the way it should look. We do that all the time. So multiple pressing, as long as they're done safe, they're not going to damage the paper. The things that damage paper happen, in the process, like too much pressure, too much heat, too much moisture. Things that are going to flatten the paper, distort the gloss, melt the inks, puts pressure on the staples, cause staple tears, spine splits, indentions in the paper. These are all things that can damage the book, but that's going to be more of an immediate thing. So if some of those things cannot be reversed, obviously, if you popped a staple or put a spine split in the book, that can't be taken out. But usually paper is very malleable. So if you've put an impression in the paper that shouldn't be there, then yeah, that can be taken out with another pressing. So multiple pressings are okay as long as they're done done correctly.
That's very helpful, because that has been a topic of conversation that I've had with lots of people. And the fact that you've been doing this since, early 2000s, I think is you have to put some stock in what it is that you're saying, right? And on my channel, I try to do a little bit of separation between like the anecdotal evidence and actual evidence, right? And that's part of the reason why I wanted you two to come on here to talk about restoration and CGC services, versus me potentially making some stuff up or misrepresenting something. So that's super helpful. So there is a list of questions that I want to get to, and we're getting close on time here. So do you guys have a little bit more time for us to jump into some of the questions that have been posted here in the room?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I try to be respectful of people's time. So let's kind of run through some of these. So Doom X92 has a question, and his question is it possible that that color, I guess, from the printing is actually going through the paper and that it's not actually color touch?
Oh, in terms of like bleed through?
I think he's referring to like bleed through of the print process and not color touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there are times where ink goes through the paper or even ink is transferred from another comic book onto the paper that's up against it, during the printing process. So yeah, absolutely. That's, and obviously it's very important to know the difference between the two. So, but that is possible.
And you guys can spot the difference between those two and will take it into account when you grade?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear when it's the intent. If repairs done to an area or touches done to an area of the comic that are, where there's wear or damage, as opposed to just sitting on top of the paper in some nondescript location, Yep. So intent, that's a big clue.
Yep. Which I normally just hear on crime shows, but very good, intent.
Well, sometimes what we do is police work, so
Very good. All right, so here's another question from Chris, who is a longtime subscriber to the channel. He says, "How can you tell if a cover is faded or was just printed with light colors?"
Well, there is both. And, again, that's something that requires looking at many, many copies of the book. Print runs, typically they fill the inks up, so the beginning of the print run or even in the middle of the print run, if they refill it, are going to have a deeper color strike. And then
Hulk 181 is a great example of that, actually, because you see some with like that really, really rich red cover and then some with like an orange cover. And that's a really good example. Those vary so much. Oh yeah,
Spidey 300, Spidey 252, New Mutants 87, AF15. Yeah, there's. Yep, there you go.
Because some people have a red cover and some have orange, and it's just okay. So that very good.
All created equal.
Yeah, but as far as the fade goes, so the thing with the fading is that A print, the inks that run low, typically some of the inks there'll be a strong color strike and others there won't be. And so when you look at the two together on the cover, you can usually tell a book that has an uneven color strike versus one where all the colors are faded. And they fade in order. I think it's reds usually go first, and greens and blues. Yellows don't fade as much, and of course black barely fades. And so you can usually tell based on the overall fading. But I tell you one trick that really helps, especially in the vintage books, is you flip the cover over and you look at the back cover. Look at the reds. And since red is the first to fade, if the front looks orange to you, flip it over and find a red spot on the back cover. And if that's orange also, it's probably printing. And if it's red, then it's probably fading.
Very good. That's super helpful. Again, some of this practical stuff that you're mentioning, I think is very helpful for people because they have these questions probably for a reason, because they're out there seeing some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So Brittany, I'm going to toss this one to you from Steve Rogers. Love that name. So he's asking a question around what cleaning services are offered by CGCs, CCS that will maintain the blue label. And I think there's two services that you guys offer, right? A quick press and a more extensive press. But can you talk about those services?
Yeah, quick press is basically like one time through the system. I have to be honest, the way the pressing works now, a quick press and a full press, the full press has like a tiny bit more, it gets worked on by hand after it goes through the press process, where a quick press does go through the press process. And then a full press, if there's any more defects or anything else that can be worked on after it's gone through the press process, it'll be worked on by hand. So it's a little bit more extensive. And with the pressing is a dry cleaning. And that's why it can keep the blue label.
Got it. So a quick press does not include cleaning. Is that what I just heard?
It does. It doesn't get worked on individually by hand afterwards.
Yeah, if it goes through the pressing process once and there's like maybe, a little bin left over or a stress line, we don't knock that out. A full press will get everything out of the book completely. Now, dry cleaning is included in both. Spine rolls included in both. So basically, it's just, it's the fine detail work. So, books that are more mid-grade that don't require fine detail work sometimes are good candidates for quick press, or books that have very light bins in them. Like you said, the moderns today, you see with the waves in the cover, that'll come out with quick press.
And that's typically how I decide, right? If it's a modern book that I've kind of eyeballed and looked through and I'm like, this is fine, I'll do a quick press on that. Older books that, they have more dings, more time in hand, more time in the world, right? I tend to send those to the more extensive press because I feel like they might need more attention, right? And so that's how I kind of make the distinction between the two services. And the quick press is what, $8, and the more extensive press is how much, Brittany?
12.
There you go. Not a huge difference in price. And personally, I think well worth the money. I always tell people, just press the book, and just know that you took the best shot on goal. So when you get that back, you're not disappointed,
Yeah.
All right. So, comic book.
That's a really good question that I was hoping Matt would answer, but someone asked in the chat twice what makes an incomplete book.
Okay.
I think that's a really good one to have answered.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can answer that one. Yeah. So two things. The interior, if there's a coupon or panel or any of the art or ad missing, up 2 by 2 inches or more, roughly, then we'll consider that incomplete. That doesn't include pieces missing from the margins of the interior pages. As far as the cover being incomplete, it has to be 1/3 or more of the cover missing. Not cumulative, but like a chunk, like 1/3, like the masthead missing off the front of a book, a remainder copy. In those two scenarios, we'll give a book an incomplete label. Now, it'll still get a grade. Just because a book's incomplete, it doesn't mean it's going to get a poor. It may still get a 3.5 or a 2.5. We have to factor all the other defects in, and we have all these standards downs in charts. So if a book's a 6.0 otherwise and it has a 2 by 2 piece out, it's a 3.5, or if it's a 3.0 and it has a 4x4 piece out, it might be like a 1.8. So obviously, as the grade lowers and the pieces get bigger that are missing, the faster it approaches a pour. But that's pretty much the parameters for incomplete.
Got it. And I think that was Tony Trembetta's question. Brittany, was that who that came from?
It could have. I don't know. It's disappeared from my chat already.
Yeah, it definitely happens. The chat moves pretty fast when you have this many people in here. So, guys, I think I personally have a lot more questions. I know that the chat has a lot more questions, but again, I want to be very respectful of what it is that we've agreed to. So I want to wrap things up here. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to make any closing remarks that you might have. Then I'll make some closing remarks, and then we will wrap this thing up.
Sure.
I'd like to start the closing remarks. Anybody in the chat that has any issues can always email me anytime, Brittany@cgccomics.com. I am happy to help out. I'm happy to answer questions. Pretty much any of the questions in the chat that didn't get answered, you guys can email me and I can get those answered for you. And I'm happy to talk about pretty much anything. I really enjoyed this, and maybe we'll get to do it again on a different topic.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess what I like to say is that, the market's changed a lot since CGC opened 20 years ago. And what I've seen is a whole new crop of collectors coming in that don't have the same experience or the opportunity to gain experience that they did before, especially since a lot of the books are at holders now. So what we're going to be working on in the near future is to educate, try and get a lot more education and information exactly like what we're doing here out there. So we've got some really exciting things planned for 2019 and beyond. So stay tuned, and I think you guys will get a lot more information from CGC that's going to help you guys in your collecting and your submitting to CGC.
I want to thank both of you for a couple of things. One, Brittany, for responding to my initial emails and all the emails, because I sent a fair number, and I want to thank you for responding to my emails in such a timely and thorough manner. Thank you for rallying the troops to allow this to actually take place. I want to thank both of you just for the thoroughness in your responses here. Thank you for helping out this comic book community, which I have grown to really appreciate. And my hope, because of the fact that I have so many more questions, the fact that the chat has so many more questions, and kind of with what Matt just said about education in the future, my hope is that maybe you guys will join me again for us to be able to do this in the future, because I think that this has been fun. I think it has been informative, which are two of the big things that I try to do on this channel. So maybe we can talk about having you guys back on the channel at some point in the future.
We would love that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, Reggie, thank you very much for having us on. It's been a pleasure.
Yep.
Chatting with you and seeing all these responses. Some of them are hilarious.
I know. We Love Comics was making me laugh out loud. I was trying so hard not to laugh when Matt was talking.
We love Comics.
That's what I think. He was like, it is depressing. It
Chris
is
at We Love Comics is hilarious. He is one of the people that has motivated me to do more and more in my channel, because when I first started, I didn't have all these wonderful lights and wonderful cameras, and he basically was like, hey, so you can do better. Yeah. And so he is a fantastic guy, fantastic resource for this community, and I am very thankful to actually call him a friend. And the fact that he's funny is like gravy on top. So with that, we are going to wrap this thing up. To every single person that joined this live stream, I want to thank you for taking a small part out of your day to actually join us. For everyone that is watching this thing on replay, I say thank you. And if you guys have questions, if you guys want to talk about something with CGC at a later date, send me some messages. Let me know what your thoughts are, because I know that there were a lot of things that we did not get to in this chat. But like Brittany, I am always around if you guys need me. With that, I will bid you adieu.